All right. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Friday. Welcome to Juneteenth weekend. What a wonderful weekend, right? All about freedom.
Yes.
And welcome to Women of Color in Retail, our Lunch and Learn series. So I'm so excited to be here today and blessed to have these incredible women with me to have this conversation. And for all of you who are joining us, I hope that you have your questions ready because this is going to be very informative. Um, so many of you asked for that well, basically, you didn't ask. You said, hey, we keep hearing from merchants. We want to hear from the people who make it happen. We want to hear from women who look like us who are in sourcing and production and more innovative aspects of the industry. And so I couldn't think of two more amazing women in those spaces. So um, Jacqueline Jenkins is an educator in the space of fashion, innovation, and strategy. And she's an author of a book on sourcing, innovations, and production. And then we have Sheree Ravenel. And so Sheree is an executive in sourcing, production, and she's done some really incredible entrepreneurial things. And so we're going to share that. We're going to share their journeys. We're going to share their challenges and understanding the hurdles and the path to where they are now. So I'm going to just jump right in. I'm going to start with Jackie. And so, Jackie, welcome. And so we go way back. We know each other now for almost 20 years. Jackie's also my soror, and she's from Philly. So, it doesn't get better than that. And so, Jackie, do you introduce yourself? Tell us something special about why this is important to you.
Well, first, Kimberly, thank you. Thank you so much for just allowing the opportunity to talk about what I think is a hidden gem in fashion and retail. And Sheree, it's great to meet you. And I guess in terms of just my intro, I it can be real quick. I've always loved fashion. I grew up in a household where my mother sewed, so there were always Vogue magazines. My dad was a tax person, and so you put the two together, and it was kind of like this weird business of fashion thing that I grew up with. And because, and granted, I'm only, Kimberly and I, we're only like 25 or something, right?
Yeah, we're very young.
Yeah, very young, very young. But
we were proteges.
Right. When I was starting my career, people didn't really think of fashion and retail as a career. And so when I first raised the point that I wanted to do fashion, it kind of got discounted, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually got two offers. I got an offer, Kimberly mentioned we're from Philadelphia. I got an offer from Strawbridges and Clothers to be a buyer, and I got an offer to be a banker in Boston. And coming out of the background that I came out of, I ended up in banking. So I did finance for about 20 years. And I've always held on to fashion. I had the pleasure of meeting Kimberly at I think it was like a line selection. I eventually realized that I could not stay on the dark side of finance and that I needed to move closer to fashion. So I did corporate finance for Ann Taylor. And, that experience, we could talk a little bit more about the book, is really what got me to understand the sourcing side of fashion. At that point, they weren't even calling it supply chain. It was just, random, go buy fabric material.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And now when you move forward to everyone is going direct to consumer, there's this real strong push at local versus global and sustainability. So much of the heart of the business is in the supply chain. And so that kind of has been my journey. I'm in fashion education now on the administrative side, and I have an online community for women in fashion. So if you want to talk about brands, I'm happy to do that. Yes. So thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. It's so funny you say that when you said you were interested in fashion, no one really thought anything of it. I remember when my now husband met my family, and my great aunt said to him, "We love Kimberly. She's just such a smart person. She could be a doctor, but she'd rather make dresses."
Right. Well, that's because you were at the Limited, right?
I went through the Macy's executive training program, went to L Brands, you know, the whole nine.
Yeah.
And I was in grad school, and so they were like, well, why would you go to grad school and you want to be in fashion? I'm like, well, you still need to be educated. Right. So Sheree, welcome.
Thank you.
Please share your entry into this.
Yes, so I'm a
business.
bit of a fashion misfit in that, like, I didn't out to work in fashion. I was a dance major. The life of the time of the fly girl had passed by the time I was in college. But that was my, I was like, I'm going to be a performer, an entertainer. And then one day I was like, but you're going to be poor. And so I changed my major to business and got an internship at Louis Vuitton. And that's kind of what set the stage, right? And so I remember I was a member of Bragg when I was in college. I'm still an active member of Bragg now. And Louis Vuitton, they wanted to be in Bragg. So that's how I got in Bragg. Like, I was interning at Louis Vuitton, and then someone in their HR team found out about Bragg, and they were like, oh, well, we have someone that could take part of that summer program. And so up until that point, I had limited knowledge of like what working in fashion meant, right? Like same as your mom, Jackie. My mom was a seamstress. My grandmother was a seamstress. I come from a family of women that enjoy fashion, love sewing and things like that. And so I thought, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a buyer or, a merchandiser or something like that. I got to see the behind the scenes, picking the fabric, talking to factories and things like that very early, like during my internship. And that is kind of what set the tone for me. So my first job out of school was this like mom and pop intimate apparel brand where I was literally just like sending samples over. I was the fit model. I did everything. I didn't know then how much fit models make. So, they had me as like the production coordinator and fit model. And then I went to Ann Taylor. I was there for 5 years. Ann Taylor is kind of like I think it's a generational thing, right? There's a group of us that all touched upon the Ann Taylor Loft experience at some point in our careers. Mm-hmm. And, from there realized that sourcing is really the unsung hero of the fashion business. Nothing happens without us, but no one ever includes us in these conversations. And so, my time at Loft, really getting to travel overseas, be in mills, be in factories, I understood then that this is where my skill set is here, right? It's like the jack of all trades, but there is a master to being the jack of all trades. And so from there, I started to get attention from premium brands like Alexander Wang, Coach. I most recently was at Bandier as their senior director of development and production. And, I love it. I love negotiating. I love being the true gatekeeper. We're really the gatekeepers of what the industry sees in the front of house, right? Like, I always joke with my friends, like, plaids and houndstooth plaids and things, Glen plaids hitting the runway, and being a staple in fashion for the past 6 or 7 years or so now, again, because we all thought that Hillary was gonna win, and like I put that in a booth in France, right, for Alexander Wang, and we put that on the runway in 20, and so it's like, but no one knows that we are those people, right? And right. So that is really kind of like the how I got here. I guess we'll get more into the nitty gritty of some of the moves I've made professionally to kind of ensure that path, because I know that I have had a trajectory that's moved a little more quickly than my peers. But yeah, just like love the sourcing side. I can't imagine doing anything else at this point. It's all I've ever done in this business.
But I think what you just said is really important for people to hear, right? Because before we did this, Jackie asked, what's the average tenure of people who attend your Lunch and Learns? And the average tenure is about 15 years. And what we found is that there are so many talented women of color in this industry who've been there between 10 and 15 years, and they're kind of stuck, right? They're stuck at that middle management role, right? And so if you think about what you just said, Sheree, about how you've had an accelerated career, I've had an accelerated career. It started at Macy's. I moved quickly. Then when I got to L Brands, I had 8 promotions in 6 years, right? And so how, and the beauty of that, to your point, was I got to experience everything. Like, I know now how, from concept to commercialization. I have worked in finance, in planning and allocation, in product development, sourcing, tech design, and I've led all of those areas too as a result of having that exposure. And oftentimes now people are on this one track, or they feel like they can't leave the company that they're working with to get another skill. And so I'd love for you to talk about that, because both of you have been agents of reinvention, right? Like, you've kind of decided where you wanted to go to get to where you want to be, right? And so I'm going to throw that question to Jackie first, because you started in finance. You couldn't be farther from finance. You're planning trips to Paris for fashion now. So let's talk about having what gave you the thought, I feel like this is not right for me. I need to create this path.
Awesome. So, the thing that I tell people, and you're right, going to Fashion Week and doing all these exciting things, I'm still very much a finance person at the end of the day. And where I'm going with that is my foundation. And so when I look at fashion, and because I've had a sourcing experience, I automatically think about, if something was going to the runway, what's the cost, what's the market, this and that. But what that has taught me is really to appreciate the business side of fashion. I cannot stress enough how often it's kind of like in sports. Everybody knows the 12 players that are on the team, on the, that you see running up and down, this and that. But there's like a whole group of people behind them that totally get paid and don't have to sweat. I'm thinking about the attorneys and this and that. And it's really that way with fashion. And so for me, I knew that I could not be a spreadsheet person counting widgets all my life. And I've always prided myself as being as a finance person that used numbers to solve problems. And what attracted me to the supply chain sourcing side, it's nothing but problems, right? And when I say problems, it's like good problems, right? And the other side of it too is I'm a little creative. And so for me, it's always been this exercise of thinking about, well, what are the parameters, be it the calendar, be it the cost, be it right, and how do I solve to that? And so I encourage folks to think about, what innately, what are you when you think about your skill set, right? And what of that can transition into a particular job area? And I will say, if you love fashion, if you love travel, if you love people, we have not touched on how the significance of relationship in sourcing, but it's such an important piece. Sheree, you mentioned going to factories, like all of that is in sourcing, supply chain, and whatever you want to call it. And so it is an exciting area of the business. And I'll put one more other plug into it too. It's not the first area of the business that people typically get laid off from. And where I'm going with that is a lot of the more glam, sexy spaces, quite honestly, are not always as stable in terms of opportunity, because they may vary with the sales. But at the end of the day, in order to sell something, you still have to make it. So supply chain is definitely in that space. And I will say, from an education standpoint, supply chain was one of the areas where I did see scholarship money that was always available to support growth in that area.
I think that's an awesome point, because your education side, when I've done some speaking for you, and what I appreciated was that there were older students, right? So they were in the business and they wanted to enhance the experience they had. And so sometimes once you're at that point in your life, you don't have the extra money because you have other responsibilities. So to know that there's money out there for scholarships is really helpful. Definitely. Sheree, so you started this part of the conversation. So let's talk about your strategic maneuver.
So I think that very early in my career, I realized that you could get in this business so fast, and that is kind of a death sentence to growth in certain areas. And so I remember being at Ann Taylor and realizing that the girls who did denim only would ever do denim, and the girls that did sweaters would only ever do sweaters, and the same in accessories. And I remember being in knits at the time, and had been talking to my VP and saying, hey, like, I'm really into wovens, right? I see that I see their designers boards. I can tell that they are, like, their country of origin, their 50% of their business is India. The other half is in Greater China. Like, this is where I want to be. And I fought tooth and nail. And when it was time for me to get promoted, I got promoted and moved to woven tops. And then when I was in wovens, I was like, okay, great. I've been doing PD and production for the garments, but I'm more interested now in raw materials. How do I get more insight and visibility to that? And so I've been very intentional about not being stuck in a product category, to expand that breadth of knowledge. And so, I'm at this point, I've done everything but sweaters in my career. And so, and have not been afraid to take jobs that were not necessarily apparel development. And so, for example, I was at Aeropostale. I was manager of men's and boys product, and I got an opportunity to go to Alexander Wang as a fabric buyer. It was a step down in title, which means it was a step down in pay, but I had been begging to do raw materials for no less than 3 to 5 years in my career in separate spaces. So I took it, right? And then 3 years later, I was director of fabric and trim at Alexander Wang, and he could not move without it begins with their raw materials. And, now working directly hand in hand with Mary Wong, who's now the COO at Proenza, but being mentored at that level, right? Learning calendar development, supplier relationship management. And now my conversations extending beyond raw material strategy to pre-bookings and working with the factories and things like that. And so I think that for me, that's why I always say I'm a bit of a fashion misfit. I've not been afraid to take those steps backwards to like propel me forward. But you have to be, there's an intentionality though, and an exit plan that has to be in place in case you are no longer on that path that you set out for, because it is a risk, right? And so I've been fortunate enough to kind of just like trust my gut. I am a bit of a wild card in that area, that I am willing to do those things. But yeah, that's how I've been able to navigate and then move quickly, because I have been willing to like leave those cozy big corporations. Even at Coach, I was at Coach before I was at Bandier, and that is like the ivory tower in the sky, right? A lot of people want to end up at Coach. It, $1 billion valuation, great benefits. They have that growth plan set out for you, but you're not learning the latest in tech, right? At Bandier, I was able to implement Clo, and we were able to do Clo 3D, and we were able to move fast and kind of take on these digitally native ideas. You're not going to get that in a one of these what I call dinosaur establishments, right? And so just kind of being very strategic in that way, I think, is what has helped me to this point.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. We've worked with these big companies, but it's what you take from them, right? Because I've never wanted to be stale. And so even while at the large companies, I was always doing something on the side or meeting with people or, looking, what are you doing? I want to know about that. And in order to really move forward, and, we know that there is a tax, right? There's this tax when we show up as women of color, because people make assumptions, right, based on their biases. And so we have to come, twice as hard and be twice as smart and have all the experience. But if you're going to have to do that anyway, then use it to your advantage. Reach out, meet new people, go to new things. Understand that the big company with the big paycheck isn't always the end game, right? That's not necessarily going to always prepare you for what's next. So what would you say, and I'm going to go back to Jackie, what would you say your biggest hurdle, or maybe your biggest disappointment? Let's start there, because a hurdle is different than a disappointment. So what is your biggest disappointment as you have gone on this path? And, let's share that.
So, and it kind of ties to the point that Cherie was making in terms of doing some lateral and even step down moves. I will say, coming from like 15 years of finance going into fashion, and it wasn't even a disappointment, it was a reality. I didn't bring my finance salary with me. And I had to make the decision that I wanted to pursue a path that I loved. And so that was fine. But there definitely is a transition with that. And one of the things that I also will say that was somewhat of a challenge. So when I made the shift, that was now probably, oh my gosh, that's, oh, well, I don't know. It's like, maybe that was 15 years ago. I can't remember. But I remember being in Ann Taylor, I came in as a finance person and I really wanted to get close to product. And because I did not grow up in the fashion industry as a merchant or went through an executive training program, this and that, to some degree, I had to go some non-traditional paths to actually come up the ladder. And one of the things that I saw very quickly, and I think this has changed somewhat because I think the business and who's in the C-suite has changed. But one thing that really stunned me was that when I looked at the C-suite, I did not see individuals that had come up the path that I had come up. Most of what were in the C-suite were more merchants, and and so that was a challenge for me. And quite honestly, that was one of the reasons why I moved into more of an entrepreneurial path, and kind of went around that, because coming into the space very ambitious, it just kind of became a block space. Now I haven't looked in a while, so I don't know, Sheree, maybe you have some thoughts on whether or not that has changed, but that was one of the challenges that I did notice.
How about you, Sheree? What do you think your biggest challenge was?
It's akin to Jackie's disappointments. And I'll say, even for me, the reason that I've been so, I think, aggressive in my career is because the thing looming over my head at all times is that there's an expiration date for us as women of color in this business. And I watched the women who essentially professionally groomed me, raised me in this business, taught me the soft skills, right? Because the hard skills being,
That's right,
the how to do a costing and things like that. But those soft skills of maintaining relationships and, checking in on your vendors outside of just business hours, or just, talking shop, and seeing those women be essentially removed from the workforce for no reasons other than they are now, making X, amount of money because they've been doing this for 20 plus years, and they're being replaced by like the young and sexy, the next, the one,
yeah,
the generation underneath. And it's not because they're no longer adding value. It's just that these companies, these organizations no longer want to pay into that level of expertise, right? Because it comes at a price when you have decades of experience and a Rolodex of contacts. And so for me, it's like, knowing the amount of work that goes into what we do. Our jobs are not, this is not a 9 to 5, 9 to 6. I'm when I need to be on. And I try to find the balance in that, but I treat the sourcing is a place where if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, you will do well, because you have to run it like it's your own business, or you will burn out if you don't have that kind of mindset. And so for me, the most disappointing part is knowing that I'm going to hit an age where I'm no longer the cool kid on the block, right? Where my acrylics and my jewelry and my baby hair can't save me, and I'm going to be replaced, right? So because I'm no longer aesthetically the fashion, girl, and so and I think that for me is just like the most disheartening. I hope that it changes, just as we have other societal conversations around ageism and body positivity and things like that. But for me, that's kind of the most disheartening thing, because there are women that built some of these organizations. I think of like a Kay Krill, a Ann Taylor, or some women like that. It's like these women built these institutions that right? And when we are no longer able to, I don't know, when we no longer aesthetically fit that mold, you're gone. And so that's what makes it kind of like, okay, you kind of have to have something going on the side, or, something that you can, call your own once this ends, because there is a ceiling.
I think though, like when you mentioned some of those women, I do think though that they were in a time where they had to be a certain way to be successful, right? And so oftentimes, and no disrespect, because I came up with them, in this space. You know, they were there and I came through, so I learned a lot from them. And some of it I learned how to do it, and some of it I learned how I did not want to do it, because there was this toxicity about the environments that these women who, you know, have now been moved on to board positions kind of brought with them, in that they had to be, and you know, I didn't know all of them personally, so I don't know what cover they had to use to be in that role and to get to where they were. But I think that it's almost like baby with the bathwater, and I think that the opportunity now is to understand the value that we bring and to appreciate everyone who's there, so that we're not working in toxic environments. It's not necessary. So let's look at the skills, and then let's be supportive of each other. Because it did often feel like, you know, if you were bringing and especially from a sourcing perspective, if you found out that something was going to be late, or we had a problem with some fabric, or a factory made a mistake, then you were the reason, right? And so you got attacked in that space, which is not what anybody wants to deal with. So I think that it's not fair that there's an expiration date, but I do think that people need to continue to grow, to understand how to do things a little differently. It's just
but I think, to Cherie's point, like, I love the fact that you mentioned Clo, which is a digital design tool. You know, I think a part of the opportunity now is staying relevant, and
Right.
you know, at the end of the day, knowing how to pick great fabrics is a skill, and if you layer on top of that the digital and you're nice. I mean, and when I say nice, you know, have relationship building skills, you're a phenomenal executive. And I think that's the piece, especially coming out of COVID, right? Where if anyone has designed anything over the last 18 months, it's been digital, or in a digital show, because we haven't been together, right? And so that has that tremendously accelerated the use of digital tools. And so now it's, how do we stay on top of that? And also, how do we think about what that consumer is now thinking in this new space? Which I just think, you know, part of that does come from your experience.
Right. Exactly. I mean, exactly. That's it in the nutshell, right? You know, it's all about really staying forever relevant, and, you know, and not young in age, but youthful in your approach, and being curious, right? Like, never feeling like, well, I already did that, so I know more, right? It's really staying curious and relevant. So, what are your aha moments? Like, what are things that just shocked you? Like, oh my God, did that really happen? And it could be good or bad, but Sheree, share.
I'm trying to think an aha moment. Okay, so I guess I'll start with a bad one, and then I'll end with a good one. So I remember the first time that I realized that I had been maybe not suppressed. I don't know if suppressed is the right word, but I remember when I realized I knew more than my boss, and then and was like negatively impacted by knowing more than my boss, and speaking up in a meeting about something that was like going in the opposite direction that it should have. And it was like related to costing. I'll never forget this, because we had a full package program, and full package means, you know, you buy it in product delivered at your DC 3PL. And my boss couldn't figure out the cut make. She wanted to break down the cost sheet, but our terms did not allow for that. And so I was just like, okay, well, why don't we have the tech designer just give us the yield? We already know the fabric cost. We can calculate that. That cuts out raw material. We can work backwards from the duty. You know, like I just said, like, okay, this is how we can work it down. We're not going to be able to calculate their overhead, but these are the fixed pieces of the costing that we know, right? And then that gray space we can extract, and that's what we can start to negotiate on. Never was invited to another meeting after that. So what I just said in that right now, never having to like the VP, and it was my time at Arrow. Never was invited to another meeting after that. And then afterward, I was like, oh, okay.
Right.
Okay. Right. And I'll never forget that, because I just, you think things are happening, you think conversations are happening behind your back and things like that, but it was like, it was explicit, right? I had crossed the line, and I was no longer now, and when you're no longer being exposed to upper management, right? Promotions are not coming your way. People are,
it's done.
And it's done. And so, which is how I ended up going to Alexander Wang, which worked out for me in the long run. But I remember that being like the first, like, oh, this is not my imagination. So these things I had been feeling, and now, and I'm just trying to problem solve. It wasn't about, upstaging anyone. It was just kind of like, no, we can get to it. It's not going to be, we'll have to extract that information a little creatively and covertly, but we can solve to the issue that you guys are, trying to solve to. And so, yeah, that was the aha. And I think the positive aha was my time spending more time in fabric and overseas, in Paris and Italy and at trade shows, and realizing that, like, you are the gatekeeper to this. These fabrics don't hit the runway unless you show them to him, because he's not coming on these trips. And seeing some of my selections, that if they were like pattern pieces or things like that in advertising, and usually sourcing, we don't get the credit for any of that, right? And so, but just kind of having those moments, like getting to see Yara Shahidi and things that I picked. And it's like, no, I didn't design it, but like, it wouldn't be here without that. The fabric made the garment, and I picked the fabric. So that was a positive aha. That's when I realized that sourcing, we were really the unsung heroes.
I think that's so important, understanding what piece of the success you own, right? And so just because you weren't the designer, right? We know you're not Alexander Wang, right? But taking ownership and feeling that success, because in order to continue to thrive, you have to have some level of success, right? So being able to look at that and say, okay, I picked that fabric. Yeah. That is a winner, right? Those are the things that I would hope that anyone who's joining us can take away, right? It doesn't always have to be the big expression of success. There is that you have to have that personal, right, level of success and ownership. So thank you for sharing that. Jackie, what's your aha or ahas? You're on mute.
You're muted. Sorry. So I will go the same way. I'll give a challenging and a positive. So I never forget, I was working in sourcing, and I was just burnt out, like really burnt out. I was doing budget. I was on the budget side, and I was starting to look at some sourcing of materials, and I was just burnt out. And I had it. So I ended up switching to another retailer. And when I left, they hired 2 people to replace me. And my aha there, quite honestly, was I needed to step back and understand the value that I was bringing to the organization, even if it was not being said. And for me, the big aha there was to really be focused on not just the work, but the contribution of the work that you're doing. And so that has kind of been more after that pivotal moment, how I managed my career in terms of, not only the volume of work that I'm doing, but the contribution that it is. And acknowledging that I may not be acknowledged for it I may not be acknowledged for it directly, but as long as I understand the contribution that it's making, not so much for the organization in and of itself, but to my career, the importance of that. So that was a very interesting aha.
I bet. Yeah. But how many times does that happen? Sheree, have you seen that too? It's so amazing that, we expected to do all of these things. And then when we leave, or we complain about it, but when we leave, then all of a sudden, it's 3 people's job.
Now a team appears, right?
Yeah.
That's happened to me at least 3 times in my career. And I think that for me, I always take that as like, I still need to work on boundary setting and that saying no, because I've, you know, I think a lot of us have worked under the understanding that we have to work harder to even be seen and recognized for things that other people don't have to work as hard to be acknowledged for. And I, you know, I'm trying to get to a place where I'm okay with saying that's not my burden to carry. But I've also been operating under that ethos for over a decade. And so it's a very hard thing to unlearn. But yeah, I've lived that. You know, even when I left, you know, my first job, I remember when I started at my first company, the manager after I got hired was like, you know, we have a high turn. Like your role hasn't actually, no one stayed in your role for more than 3 months. And I had been there for 2 years. And then when I left, they were back on that cycle of like, you know, people coming in being like, oh, absolutely not. and, you know, again, and then, having, you know, saying, hey, my team is burning out, I'm burning out, and it being like, oh, we don't have the budget for this, and, you know, the next quarter, and then you leave and 3 to 4 people and a temp appear, you know, and, you know, so I definitely get that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a junior buyer and the team I was on, there were 2 junior buyers, there were 2 coordinators, there were 3 assistants and an associate and the senior buyer. And then I got promoted into that role, and all of a sudden, same role that we have built this business, right? So $350 million business, I got promoted into that senior chair, and there was a coordinator and an assistant. I was like, wait a minute, how does that work? I don't understand. Oh, we're going to give you another associate. Then they gave me an associate who was a designer who couldn't count. So I said, I don't need a designer. I need an associate. And they were like, well, there's nowhere for you to go. You've promoted yourself into this position, and this is what it is. And I was like, okay, then I have to leave because I'm not going to kill myself for this role when just a few months ago, when nobody looked like me, they had like a whole team, and now you're giving me this, but I'm crippled, right? So yeah, the understanding those boundaries and being, I guess, either stupid enough or courageous enough to just say, I'm not doing it. But so Jackie, that was the down. So what's the up? Tell us an positive aha.
I mean, I think the positive was having that awakening moment and being able to bring that into the rest of my career and kind of having that lens of, okay, I'm not crazy. I really am tired. You know what I mean? And so that moment is just something that I've always carried with me in managing my career. And it also brought to light the need to not just listen to myself, but to have others, be it mentors, peer group, to also help validate what I'm thinking and feeling. So, you know, it was just a positive moment of saying, okay, we got to do something different. And it's not all because I can't do the work. It's just too much work, right? And so what does that mean? And also it kind of got me to think more about how to negotiate jobs in terms of roles and responsibilities, and being clear about what I need to be the performer that you would like to see, right?
Yeah.
And that is important, especially in sourcing, because, you know, it's one of those things where there's a lot of blurred lines, and, you know, a lot of times because you don't want to go against the bottom lines, the team may be small, this and that, but there are resources that you need to actually meet the challenges that you're being presented with. And so my aha was really, okay, how to be vocal and how to take that and really build my career from there.
Awesome. So we're coming up to our last few minutes together, and I want to spend some time talking about the incredible things that you both are doing. You know, how to follow you, how to be involved. So let's start, Jackie. Tell us about J Curations and the book and all the amazing things that you're doing.
Awesome. I thank you for the question. So 2 things. I have the book here now. It's Fashion Supply Chain Management. Yes, this is a shameless plug.
I have it too.
Yeah, and well, Kimberly's actually in it. Kimberly's in the logistics chapter, and actually the book I wrote it, and it's from concept to consumer, how to think about supply chain management. It is a textbook, but I also encourage individuals that are on the design side that are thinking about how to source product, how you may want to think about it, right? And some of the number side of it. And because my background's finance, there's a pretty detailed way to think about costing. So that's the book. And then my other focus has been this community called Sophisticated Curations. And we are an online content community for, I call it the 40 plus savvy fashionista. And what we focus on there is really helping her to think about fashion options as she progresses in her style and all that comes with that. And so we do a 20-minute fashion distraction on Facebook Live on Wednesdays. We're taking a group of women to Paris Fashion Week next year. And we're actually working on a resale exchange where within our community, you can actually purchase and shop everybody's closets. So thank you, Kimberly, for this opportunity. The page on Facebook is Sophisticated Curations. And if you could follow me on Instagram at JCurations, that would be wonderful. And watch our show on Wednesday night.
Wait, how do you get the book?
Oh, yeah. The book. Oh, great. Yes, the book is on Amazon. And it's Fashion Supply Chain Management. And actually, for the longest, we were the only fashion supply chain management book there. So I think you can easily find it. And it's just a great way to kind of understand this space of supply chain management.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Sheree.
So that is amazing, Jackie, first of all, because I'm going to tell you why. I teach a course called Back of House Business Essentials. And I'm going to buy that book today because I'm going to see how I can integrate it in the curriculum and just force my students to.
See how we put this together? See how we do this? See?
Thank you.
There's always a method to my madness. Always.
I will email you.
I lit up. Okay, so I teach a course outside of my my day job. I teach a course, Back of House Business Essentials, and it's a 6-week course, and the modules are based on the modules are set on like old school hip hop, 90s hip hop classes. So I have a module, Cash Rules Everything Around Me. That's when we go over costing. And so it's kind of in that vein. And you can find me on Instagram, Back of House, BOH.business. And that's the IG handle. And then separate from that, I do volunteer with a fashion school in the 9th Ward in New Orleans, the Material Institute. It's a free fashion school for that community. Masking and beading is a big tradition. Mardi Gras Indians, if you guys are familiar with New Orleans culture. Yeah. And so trying to extend beyond just, fashion, the parade fashion that takes place, and giving that community the tools to, and some of the resources to create their own lines. I've been more instrumental in making sure that they're not just learning the design element, and that they understand how to cost their garments and, speak to mills and factories go forward. And then separately from that, I do have a podcast. Everyone has a podcast these days, Curls in the Hood. And it is for just kind of millennial culture things, right? We're angry about everything, my generation. So that's what we talk about it. And that is also just Curls in the Hood on Instagram.
Well, thank you. That is amazing, right? We you guys do so much, but seriously, I wanted the two of you together because I knew there would be synergy. So I'm really happy to bring you together. And Sheree, I'm going to talk to you about that class too, because I'm really excited. So Women of Color in Retail is growing. And so we're going to do this big event around Summer Fashion Week in New York City, so that we can actually meet and more women of color can come together. We are working on some incredible curriculum and hard and soft skill programming. We'll be partnering with some really great names. And so this is growing. And so I'm very excited about that. We are going to have a new branding. We just have a lot going on in the space so that we can continue to support women of color in this retail space. There are fashion companies for designers, and there are all these different, but there hasn't really been a space for women of color in retail. And, as we have talked about on so many occasions, we're the engines that make it happen. And so we need to support each other, and I want to make sure that everyone is successful. So I thank you both. And I thank everyone who watched us. Unfortunately, it looked like our internet was a little wonky, but our voices were not cut off, so that's great. Our images may have been a little, twerky, but our words were heard. And so I appreciate your time. I appreciate everyone who joined us. And you can always find us at Women of Color in Retail. We now have a Slack channel, as well as the LinkedIn group. And we're going to be coming probably to a city near all of you very shortly, now that people are vaccinated and we can get together, which is an amazing thing. So everyone have a wonderful weekend. However you celebrate and reflect on Juneteenth, please do it safely. And bless you. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Sheree. And we look forward to next month. See you soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So here's the internet not working. I can't end the broadcast. They want us to keep talking.
Okay. Kimberly, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. This was a perfect pairing. As soon as I saw your book, I was like,
yeah.